From Orpheus searching for Eurydice to Osiris scattered across Egypt, every culture guarded the same hidden doctrine, that the soul must be dismembered before it can remember itself. This video is your lantern into the mysteries, a journey through myths that aren't just stories, but maps of consciousness, echoes of an ancient science of the soul. So if you're ready to see why gods are torn apart, why lovers descend into the underworld, and what all this has to do with your own spiritual resurrection, then let's step beyond the veil together. Much of what we explore in this journey comes from the work of Manly P. Hall, a modern mystic, philosopher, and the scholar of the world's ancient wisdom. His monumental book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, unveils the hidden truths, symbols, and philosophies preserved through the ages, offering a roadmap to understanding the mysteries behind myth, ritual, and the human soul. As we peer beyond the veil, we see a pattern emerging through time and across continents. These myths are not merely tales of gods and heroes, they are coded maps of wisdom, guiding the seeker through the trials of the soul. And it begins with Orpheus, the first of the poets and prophets, whose journey between life and death carries the echoes of an ancient perennial philosophy. Let us step into his world where music, magic, and divine mysteries converge. The Orphic myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. Legend suggests that the historical Orpheus was a Hindu, the founder of theology among the Greeks, which he used to promulgate his perennial philosophy, deriving from his roots of Brahmanism. He is credited to be the first of the poets, and the prince of the poets. He taught the Greeks their sacred rites and mysteries. Homer, Plato, and Pythagoras owe their theologies to him. See the mystical hymns of Orpheus. He was an initiate of the mysteries of the Calibri at Samothrace, learning the secrets of music and medicine, as well as an initiate of the Egyptian mysteries, where he acquired the secrets of magic, sorcery, and astrology. Orpheus became entangled in his own mythology and was personified as the symbol of the Greek school of ancient wisdom, as well as immortalized as the patron of music. He enchanted the gods, animals, and trees with his beautiful harmonies played upon his seven-string lyre, representing the seven divine truths. He communicated the divine secrets of humanity through his music, and even the gods feared he would overthrow them. While trying to flee a villainous seducer, Eurydice, the wife of Orpheus, was bitten on the heel by a venomous serpent, resulting in her death. Orpheus traveled to the underworld and convinced Pluto and Persephone, by way of his charming music, to allow Eurydice to return to the realm of the living. This agreement was conditional. Orpheus was not permitted to look back to affirm that Eurydice was safely following his lead. His fear of her straying from him resulted in him turning his head. Immediately she was pulled back into the clutches of darkness. Eurydice is humanity, dead from the serpent of false knowledge and imprisoned in the underworld of ignorance. In this allegory, Orpheus signifies theology, which wins her from the king of the dead, but fails to accomplish his resurrection because it falsely estimates and mistrusts the innate understanding within the human soul. Orpheus wandered the earth for a while in sorrow. There are many differing accounts of his demise. Some say that the guilt became too heavy and he committed suicide. Others claim that he died from a bolt of lightning. The commonly accepted version of his death was that he was torn to pieces by a Ciconian woman he turned down. The Ciconian woman who tore Orpheus limb from limb symbolizes the various contending theological factions which destroy the body of truth. They cannot accomplish this, however, until their discordant cries drown out the harmony drawn by Orpheus from his magical lyre. Philosophy versus theology. Philosophy, or natural theology, studies ultimate reality, first cause, the nature of the divine, etc., through reason and experience, while theology studies these topics through scripture interpreted as the Word of God. The head of Orpheus was cast into the river of Hebrus along with his lyre. His head, floating down to the sea, was caught in a rock where it gave oracles for many years. The lyre was fashioned into a constellation by the gods. The head of Orpheus is the secret esoteric doctrines of his cult that continue to live and speak even after his body is long past. In the 10th book of Plato's Republic, it is said that Orpheus chose to reincarnate in the body of a swan instead of a human because of his sad fate. The white swan is a symbol of spiritual truths. The allegory symbolizes the teachings of Orpheus living on and being taught by enlightened initiates of all future ages. From here, we follow the universal pattern into Egypt, another civilization guarding the same cosmic secret of death, scattering, and rebirth. The myth of Osiris. The Egyptians deified the sun into the god Osiris, the vital active positive component of nature. He was represented as an opened eye like that of the eye of the universe, the sun. According to Robert Flood, the sun has three properties: life, light, and heat. These three vivify and vitalize the three worlds: spiritual, intellectual, and material, the first three master masons. For the myth of Osiris cannot be told without Isis, the divine counterpart, wisdom itself, the receptive principle balancing the solar force. Isis, the daughter of Thoth, was the Egyptian goddess of wisdom. Richard Payne Knight believed the name to be of northern Scandinavian descent, translating to Isa, meaning ice or water in its most negative state. For this reason, the Druids of Britain worshipped her under the feminine symbol of the moon. In many cultures, Isis was the goddess of fertility and represented specifically the atmospheric moisture that vivifies all living things and protects them from the heat of the sun, i.e., the earth or material plane. Osiris was depicted with the lower half of his body mummified, representing the tomb of the physical body, which the living spirit animates, the active principle of God, and the receptive aspect of nature. Osiris was depicted with black skin as an allegory for the muddy waters of the Nile that, together with the fertile soil of Egypt, Isis, his sister wife, produced vegetation and life. Osiris, god of life and the fertile Nile, was betrayed and torn apart by his jealous brother Set. His body was cast across the land piece by piece as chaos seemed to triumph over order. Isis, his sister wife, gathered the fragments of his body, restoring him through the sacred rites, preserving the spark of life that death could not extinguish. The allegory is clear. The cycle of destruction and restoration mirrors the inner workings of the soul. Through fragmentation, the hidden essence is revealed, and through reassembly, the immortal principle endures. In Osiris, we see a cosmic lesson that death, dismemberment, and loss are never the end, but the necessary passage to renewal and higher understanding. This theme is not uniquely Egyptian. The Greeks expressed it through another solar deity, Bacchus, whose fate mirrors that of Osiris in every essential way. The myth of Bacchus. We see another example of dismemberment in mythology in the central allegory of the Bacchic rite, a secret society much like modern Freemasonry, where Bacchus, the solar deity, which is Dionysus and Osiris, gets torn limb from limb by the Titans. They achieve the slaying of Bacchus by causing him to become enamored with his own reflection in a mirror. After dismembering him, they boiled his body parts, then roasted them. Pallas rescued the heart, however, and because of this, Bacchus was able to live again. Jupiter, the demiurgus, creator of the universe, killed the Titans by means of thunderbolts, turning their bodies into ashes. The human race was birthed out of the ashes of the Titans, which contained some of Bacchus, since the Titans had consumed most of his flesh. Therefore, man was said to consist partly of Bacchus. Because man was the tomb of the god containing the divine life force, the Greek mysteries warned against suicide. The chief titan Bacchus was referred to by Pythagoras as the titanic monad. The Bacchic state signifies the unity of the rational soul in a state of self-knowledge, and the titanic state of the diversity of the rational soul, which being scattered through creation, loses the consciousness of its own essential oneness. The mirror stands for the lower titanic world, the sea of illusion. Bacchus, seeing his own reflection, the mundane rational soul, accepts the image as a likeness of his true self by way of logic and reason, ignoring his actual true self, the invisible divine nature within. The boiling of the dismembered body parts represent the divine monad being submerged into the material plane. The roasting represents the liberating of the divine essence, ascending from the material confines. Jupiter created man, which sole purpose was to free the Bacchic principle from its titanic confines. Jupiter is the third person of the creative triad, being the lord of death. Death exists only in the lowest of the three worlds, being the material realm. The 12 titans represent the signs of the zodiac, being involved in influencing the material world, and Bacchus represents the sun. Disintegration exists so that reintegration may flow upon a higher level of intelligence and form. The heart which was rescued represents the immortal essence of the rational soul. The Bacchic mysteries beheld the goal of disentangling it from its irrational nature, dissolving the illusion and separateness and returning to a state of unity or oneness. The various parts and members of Bacchus were gathered from the corners of the earth. When all rational parts are gathered, Bacchus is resurrected. The tale of Brother Lustig. Here we find the same themes in European folklore. In the German fairy tale Brother Lustig, 1812, from the Brothers Grimm, there is a story of a princess who was resurrected by St. Peter. He went about this by means of cutting up the princess's body. He then boiled it until only the bones remained. He then invokes God's name to resurrect the princess. This is an allegory of reintegration and separation returning to divine union. Examples in alchemy. The alchemists inherited this doctrine too, encoding it in their stages of the great work, each one a symbolic dismemberment of the inner self. In their time, the alchemists had already found a way of symbolizing the state of inner separation of the spiritual components by means of the stages opus, which they called solutio, calcinatio, insuratio, portraying them sometimes in such emblems as personal sacrifices or mutilations of the body, such as cutting off of the mother's hands or the paws of the lion. In the myths of Mesoamerica, we encounter a striking parallel to the stories of Orpheus, Osiris, and Bacchus. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, or in other versions, the maize god, embodies the principle of life itself. To bring sustenance to humanity, he must descend into darkness. In many tellings, he is struck down, torn apart, or dismembered, his body scattered across the land. Yet this destruction is not the end. From his broken form springs the seed of life, maize for the people, light for the soul. His death and dismemberment are a cosmic sacrifice, a necessary unbinding so that life can emerge anew. Symbolically, Quetzalcoatl mirrors the universal law that runs through all myth. For the divine spark to awaken in the material realm, it must first endure fragmentation. The scattered pieces carry the hidden essence, and from them, creation itself is nourished. Just as Isis gathered Osiris or the Bacchic heart was rescued, so too does the maize god's essence survive, feeding both body and spirit. In many shamanic traditions across the world, the journey to wisdom begins with what can only be described as a symbolic death. The initiate is led into the underworld, a spiritual realm of darkness and chaos, where the soul is stripped bare and the familiar self is dismantled. In Siberia, the shaman spirits are intentionally torn apart in vision quests or trance journeys, wandering among spirits of animals, ancestors, and the elements. In the Amazon, initiates endure isolation, fasting, or sacred plant medicine, entering states where their identity dissolves entirely. Every fear, attachment, and egoic fragment is confronted and symbolically dismembered. Yet, from the dissolution comes profound insight. The shaman emerges not as the same person, but as a vessel of knowledge, a bridge between worlds. Their fragmented spirit is reintegrated, aligned with the greater cosmos, and empowered to heal others. The death they undergo is a ritual mirror of the myths we've already seen. This teaches us a universal truth. Growth, wisdom, and spiritual power are forged in the crucible of discernment. Only by surrendering the old, broken parts of the self can be reborn into full consciousness. The shamanic death initiation is not a loss, it is the alchemy of the soul. In Christian mysticism, the story of Christ's crucifixion is the ultimate allegory of dismemberment and reintegration. Christ's body is broken on the cross, hands nailed, ribs pierced, blood and water flowing, symbolizing the scattering of divine essence into the material world. Yet, from this apparent destruction emerges the possibility of eternal life, not just for Christ, but for all of humanity. The resurrection is the reintegration of what was fragmented. The divine spark, temporarily hidden in the material plane, rises again, whole and luminous, offering a path for the soul to return to unity with God. The Eucharist mirrors this process. Through the symbolic consumption of Christ's body and blood, believers internalize the divine essence, uniting the scattered pieces of the soul with eternal consciousness. Christian mystics, from Meister Eckhart to Hildegard in Bingen, describe the process as the death of the self, a letting go of ego, attachment, and worldly identity, so the soul may awaken to its divine reality. Here too we see the universal pattern repeating through fragmentation. The hidden essence is revealed through the reintegration. The immortal principle endures. Brahmanism, the Vedic dismemberment myths. Purusha, the cosmic man, Rigveda 10:19. The most famous of the symbolic dismemberment in early Brahmanism is the Purusha Sukta. Purusha, the primordial cosmic being, is sacrificed by the gods, and his body is dismembered. From his different parts emerge the universe itself. His mouth becomes the priests, his arms become the warriors, his thighs become merchants, farmers, and his feet become the servants. The sun, moon, wind, and other elements also arise from his dismembered body. The fragmentation of Purusha represents the projection of the divine into the material universe. The cosmos itself is born from divine dismemberment. It mirrors this theme of the soul or the divine essence being scattered before reintegration or realization. In later Vedic stories, Vitra, the dragon or serpent of the drought, is killed by Indra, the storm god. Vitra embodies cosmic obstruction, the withholding of waters, life force. Indra splits Vritra's body to release the waters, restoring order to the cosmos. According to Heinrich Zimmer, the dismemberment of the formless dragon Vritra in Indian mythology reveals the process whereby multiplicity sprang out of the primogenial unity. Indian mythology also maintains that the creation of multiplicity was the outcome of sin of Indra, whose expiation implies the reintegration of all existence into unity. And that is from the Dictionary of Symbols by J.E. Surlott. Brahman is the eternal, formless, all-pervading consciousness that is the source of all creation, existence, and being. It is infinite and timeless, beyond duality and beyond good and evil. The Atman is the inner essence of every living being, the individual spark of Brahman. Each living being carries a reflection of Brahman as their inner life spark, the divine consciousness within. Spiritual realization is recognizing that the Atman and the Brahman universal essence are ultimately one. In mystical terms, it's the divine seed that can be dismembered or scattered in the material world, but ultimately seeks reintegration and awakening. The hero's journey and the dragon. In countless myths across the world, the hero's journey reveals a timeless pattern. The soul must confront and overcome its own darkness to achieve transformation. Joseph Campbell, the great mythologist, described this in his study of the monomyth, the hero's adventure, as a universal narrative or departure, initiation, and return. In these stories, the dragon is never just a beast. It is the personification of the ego, the lower self, and the illusions that bind us. The dragon guards virgins, treasures, or gold, symbolizing the desires, attachments, and false beliefs that must be faced and transcended. The hero cannot advance without confronting this creature, for it represents the resistance within the self that keeps the divine essence imprisoned. When the hero slays the dragon, the act is not merely violence, it is the triumph of consciousness over the ego, awareness over illusion. By facing the dragon, the hero liberates the hidden treasures of the soul, rescues what was trapped, and prepares for the reintegration of the self into a higher state of being. From the fusion of Greek and Egyptian thought arises the figure of Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great Hermes, revered as the master of wisdom, alchemy, and the hidden laws of the cosmos. In Hermetic philosophy, he embodies the principle of divine intelligence, guiding humanity through the mysteries of life, death, and the soul's ultimate reintegration with the divine. The central text of the Philosophical Hermetica, the Corpus Hermeticum, begins with a foundational vision where Hermes Trismegistus encounters a vast winged dragon. The dragon is not an adversary, but a symbol of the universal mind and divine power. Poimander, or Poimandres, the dragon introduced itself as Poimandres, which means mind of sovereignty. This dragon of the mysteries is a benevolent, albeit initially frightening, manifestation of the divine spirit or creative source. Poimandres acts as Hermes' guide, revealing the secrets of the universe's creation, the nature of light and darkness, and the path of the human soul to return to its divine source. The vision is an experience of spiritual enlightenment and union with the divine mind. At the heart of Hermetic wisdom lies the Emerald Tablet of Thoth, a compact but profound text that reveals the 7 natural laws governing all of existence, principles that bridge the divine and the material, guiding the soul's journey through creation, disintegration, and reintegration. One of the foundational principles revealed in the Emerald Tablet of Thoth is the law of cause and effect, the understanding that every action, every motion in the universe produces a reaction, a return. This law is not only spiritual, but profoundly physical. When we die, our body reintegrates with the earth itself. What was once a piece of stone on a mountain may become the atoms in our eyes, and when we pass, those atoms return, recycled into the cycle of life. In this way, the law of cause and effect mirrors the spiritual journey of dismemberment and reintegration, the scattering and restoration of the divine spark within the cycle of creation itself. In Buddhism, the question of what happens after death takes on a radically different perspective. There is no enduring I to die. What we call the self is a collection of fleeting phenomena, a temporary arrangement of mind, body, and consciousness. Where we are not the observer, we are mere observation, like a wave in the ocean, arising and dissolving, inseparable from the vast whole. When the body dies, its components, earth, water, fire, and air, return to the world, echoing the same principle we saw in Hermetic law and the alchemical thought. But consciousness, too, is not lost. It continues as part of the cycle of dependent origination, influencing future forms, lives, and experiences. Death is not an end, but a transformation, a reintegration into the eternal flow of existence, where the illusion of separation dissolves and the true nature of reality, the interconnected, observing universe, remains. The Rosicrucians, heirs to Hermetic and alchemical wisdom, encoded the cycles of the soul in their art and symbolism. Their diagrams often depicted spirals, Ouroboros, the stages of transformation, representing the eternal process of death, dismemberment, dissolution, and reintegration. Each stage is a reflection of the soul's journey, the breaking apart of the old self, the purification and transmutation of spirit, and the final reintegration into unity with the divine. Through these visual cycles, the Rosicrucians communicate that the spiritual evolution is not linear but cyclical. Like the phoenix, the soul rises anew after every dissolution. Their art serves as a map for the initiate, showing that every ending is the prelude to a higher beginning. Every fragment is the path to ultimate wholeness. the Rosicrucian rose and the thousand-petal lotus. In Rosicrucian symbolism, the rose is more than a flower. It is the emblem of the soul's unfolding and the radiant expression of divine consciousness. Just as the petals of a rose open outward from a central core, the Rosicrucian rose represents emanation from a spiritual center, the hidden spark of the divine within each initiate. The imagery mirrors the thousand-petal lotus of Eastern mysticism, which blooms from the crown chakra in meditation, symbolizing ultimate enlightenment and the full awakening of consciousness. Each petal represents a layer of consciousness, a stage of spiritual development, or fragment of the self reintegrated into unity. Through the rose, the Rosicrucians communicate the same truth found in alchemy, Hermeticism, and the world's myths. From the center of being arises the radiance of the soul, unfolding outward, touching all creation. The rose is the living symbol of the inner journey, from fragmentation and trials to reintegration, wholeness, and transcendence. In Taoism, all creation flows from the Tao, the ineffable source of all things. This is not creation in the conventional sense, it is emanation. Like light radiating from the sun or waves rolling outward from a stone dropped in water, the Tao expresses itself in layers, degrees, and forms, unfolding endlessly into the manifest world. This mirrors the emanationist theories found in Hermeticism, Neoplatonism, and other mystical traditions. The one radiates its essence, scattering fragments of the divine consciousness into the cosmos, from which all life, matter, and consciousness arise, from a singular source, yet remain connected to it. In this light, Taoism teaches that what we perceive as a multiplicity, our bodies, thoughts, the material world, is a play of emanated forms. Death, dismemberment, and transformation are simply stages in the return journey. The scattered pieces of consciousness dissolve into the Tao, only to be reintegrated into the eternal whole. In Kabbalistic thought, the divine essence emanates from Ein Sof, the infinite, unknowable source, through the 10 Sephirot, 10 attributes or vessels that structure creation itself. Each Sephirah is a channel of divine energy, a stage of unfolding of reality, and together they map the journey of consciousness from unity into multiplicity and back again. The process of creation in Kabbalah mirrors the dismemberment myths we've explored. The divine spark is projected, scattered, and contained within vessels. Just as Osiris's body was scattered or Bacchus's flesh is consumed by the Titans, sometimes these vessels rupture under intensity of divine light, a concept known as Shevirat HaKelim, the shattering of the vessels, resulting in fragmentation, chaos, and the scattering of sparks of holiness throughout the material world. In many esoteric systems that blend Kabbalah, Hermeticism, and mystical cosmology, reality is understood as a spectrum of vibration, from the subtle and luminous to the dense and material. Within this framework, different classes of being naturally inhabit or correspond to different levels of the vibrational hierarchy. At the highest, most refined level of existence, the realms closest to Ein Sof in Kabbalistic terms, reside the archangels. These beings aren't people with wings, they are vast intelligences, archetypal patterns of consciousness that govern entire spheres of experience. In Kabbalah, they are associated with the Sephirot: Michael, Tepereth, beauty, harmony; Gabriel with Yesod, foundation, imagination; Raphael with Hod, Mercury, mind, healing; Uriel with Gevurah, strength and severity, and so on. Archangels represent the high-frequency emanations, pure forces that guide, illuminate, and structure the spiritual architecture of the universe. They live in the Yetziric and Briatic worlds, subtle creative realms where forms originate before they descend into matter. As the emanation ripples outward from the divine core, consciousness condenses. These are the four worlds: emanation, Atziluth, pure divinity; creation, Bria, archetypes and archangels; formation, Yetzirah, angels, intelligences, and action, Asiya, material world and its elemental forces. This stratification is mirrored in Hermeticism, Neoplatonism, and Rosicrucianism. The further the emanation travels from the source, the slower the vibration becomes. Just as light becomes heat, then matter, consciousness becomes increasingly finite and separate. Elementals and lower world spirits. As vibration becomes dense enough to crystallize into physicality, different entities correspond to the four elements. These beings are called elementals, described across Hermetic, alchemical, and Kabbalistic traditions. Now, I'm not too sure how to pronounce these. Gnomes, earth; Undines, water; Sylphs, air; and salamanders, fire. They inhabit the lower planes of Yetzirah and Asiya, right at the threshold where energy becomes matter. Unlike archangels, elementals are not moral or wise. They're forces of nature, like living currents. Gnomes embody solidity, form, and inertia. Undines embody emotion and fluidity. Sylphs embody thought, breath, and motion. Salamanders embody transformation and will. In this cosmology, human beings sit at the crossroads, capable of communion both upward towards the archangels and downward towards elemental nature. A unified vision. Archangels and the elementals represent two ends of the same continuum. Archangels, the first luminous emanations of the divine intelligence, and elementals, the last sparks of consciousness before spirit becomes matter. You can think of it as a great vibrational waterfall, a descent of spirit into embodiment, and an ascent of embodiment back into spirit. In ancient Greece, salamanders were associated with the god Apollo, as well as fire. Salamanders regrow their lost tail or limbs. This is symbolic of rebirth, regeneration, and renewal. This spirit animal reminds us to let go of the past and embrace our new selves. The salamander, rising from the fire and regenerating what was lost, reminds us that transformation is the law of life. Across every myth, every teaching, every hidden tradition, the story is the same. Fragmentation is never final. Dismemberment is never defeat. The soul spark, scattered through time, space, and matter, tested by dragons, challenged by illusion, and confronted with its own shadows, but in every trial lies a path to reintegration, a return to wholeness. So how can we, in a practical sense, reintegrate our fragmented psyche? Each area of our psyche holds a specific purpose and duty, but when these parts are unaligned, it's like our mind is at war with itself. Let us now take a look at Western Hermeticism. Western mystery schools versus Egyptian theology. In Freemasonry, Hermetic principles were integrated symbolically. The building of the temple mirrored the inner construction of the self. The Egyptian motifs were often reinterpreted as moral allegories rather than literal deities. The original Egyptian understanding. In contrast, the ancient Egyptians approached their gods not merely as symbols, but as living forces of nature and cosmic principles. Ra, Isis, Osiris, Thoth, and Horus, these were not allegories for psychological processes, as in Hermeticism. They were active forces animating the universe and society. Rituals, temples, and mythic storytelling were functional, aiming to maintain Ma'at, cosmic order, and ensure harmony between humans, gods, and nature. The Egyptian worldview was embodied and cyclical, deeply tied to the Nile, the sun, and the seasons. Myth and ritual were practical expressions of cosmic law, not purely symbolic tools for personal initiation. The gods were interrelated, dynamic, and part of an ongoing dialogue between the human and divine realms, a living, interactive theology rather than a map for abstract intellectual assent. Through the eye of Western Hermeticism, this scarab hieroglyph reveals a storehouse of esoteric knowledge. It is the blueprint of reintegration of the psyche. A scarab's head and wings mirror the composition of the human skull and brain. Both have three main sections when observed from a top-down perspective. The left hemisphere, in charge of rational analytical aspects, and resides in the realm of logic and structure. This was symbolized by Osiris, aka the active principle. The right hemisphere is responsible for intuition, imagination, and emotion, where creativity and insight arise. This was symbolized by Isis, the receptive principle. The prefrontal cortex, located at the front of the brain, is the latest evolved section and is in charge of will. In the scarab pictograph, this area represents the archetype of Ra. Western Hermetic schools often adapted Egyptian symbolism to fit philosophical or mystical frameworks, which sometimes led to reinterpretation that diverged from the original Egyptian intentions. For example, Ra became a metaphor for conscious will and solar principle rather than a living solar deity. Ra came to represent the self-sufficient new man in the mystery schools. The letters RA standing for righteous action, the marriage of action in the physical backed by divine wisdom and pure intentions. This is why Jesus was represented as a baby with an adult's face in Renaissance paintings. Masonic artists like Leonardo da Vinci encoded their paintings with these secret truths in fear of being crucified as a heretic. The crude symbology of the scarab is expanded upon in the Masonic trestle board. These three components of Trinity, represented by the three pillars, the marriage of opposites, returning the mind to an integrated state after it has been deranged by psychosis. If you're interested in diving deeper into the theme of reintegration, join me on part 2 where we explore Western Hermeticism and break down all 7 natural laws. Thanks for watching.